Hey guys, Problematic Boy here with a video on bleed. This is not really going to be a build video. This is more going to be a general video talking about bleed, your options for bleed, how bleed works. I realized after doing two build guides that there's still like a lot of like people don't really understand bleed that well. So let's get into it. Right now I'm on my bleed Rahan, who's still wielding. And I have done a lot of experimenting. Some things I have spoken about, I've been maybe a little bit wrong about. I haven't been super wrong on anything, but uh, for starters, there's a lot of options to how you can play Bleed that I've been exploring. Uh, that all seem to be able to clear fairly well, and there's some differences in single targets. So let's get into Bleed itself. I did explain in the one video that Bleed is an ailment that deals physical damage per second for 4 seconds based on base bleed damage. Now, it does that base bleed damage every 1 second for as long as the dot lasts, so we know that. Okay, good. So our goals in order to scale our damage is to get the base bleed as high as possible. That is the number that matters. That is really the only number that matters. And then, of course, we want to scale tags, right? So we want to scale ailment damage, generic physical damage, and what is there anything else really? Uh, Sometimes crit. So, and like in the Dread video, I talk a little bit about Reap here. You want multiple sources of Reap. Reaps do not stack, but they do cycle through their cooldowns. So if one Reap is on cooldown, it'll do the other Reap. So Bleed, it's beneficial to have multiple sources of Reap, whether you're going Reap Purification or not going Reap Purification. That's one of the things I was wrong about, is that there is possibility, like this character right here right now is not using Reap Purification. I'm not sure how great it is. It seems to feel pretty good right now. But yeah. So that's Bleed. And that was the one thing I wrote about. The second thing I was wrong about is Affliction. I'm not super sure how good Affliction Effect is, but I am super sure that getting your targets to 100 Affliction either through a ring or even better, getting a precise deep pain, which gives 16 Affliction inflicted per second, is definitely worth getting to that 100 Affliction on enemies. I don't know. I think if Affliction Effect is sort of iffy to scale. It's hard to get on your gear when there's so many other mods that you want. So that is the start of the. Let me have some coffee here. Oh. I have specific questions about talents. Now, the talents that you're taking on Bleed really depend on what you are trying to do. This is a non-rate purification build, but it's still going with some crit here. As you can see, we get 100% additional bleed damage by critical strikes. You'll notice this is different than what I had in my Rohan build video, because I've been trying different stuff out. And we have brutality on our belt, so we're just getting crit strike here with cohesion. Here we're getting fervor for more crits, and we're getting open wounds, which I'm not ready to talk about at this point in the video. But as far as talents go, really you can start God of War, or you can start Goddess of Darkness. And I've tried Goddess of Darkness with going either Warlock. Here's the good talents, okay? There's basically 4 great damage talents. God of War, Shadow Dancer. I can get out of it. Warlock and Psychic. Now, the thing about starting Goddess of Darkness, I don't think Goddess of Darkness is that great, but she lets you pick as your second Psychic or Warlock, and they're both really strong. And your third, you can pick up Shadow Dancer, or you can pick up Warlock or Psychic that you didn't take. So there's a lot of options here. And then for third talents, I've also experimented with just taking tankiness. I think it's might be a good idea to get tankiness either in Bloodstriker or in the Brave, and just scale your life up a lot. Because if you're going full right side, so let's say you go Goddess of Darkness and you go Psychic, you're going to end up with maybe 4k life, even if you have a lot of life on gear. And if you go this route, where you go God of War, Shadow Dancer, and maybe get Warlock or something, you're going to end up with maybe 4.4k life. And it's really not a whole lot of life, especially if you might reserve life if you don't have a restraint or something like that. So I like coming over here. These two I've been working around with. If you look at Blood Striker, here is fine. You just get 40% extra life, and this survival will node also gives you just a lot of survivability. I wouldn't ever go life path. It's messy, but maybe No Loose Ends has some things with like the crit rating, getting more consistent crits. But the crits are fairly consistent with Cohesion and Instant Smash, which brings us to, if you're tailoring your talent build, Bleed has two ways to be played. Two. Here's one, here's the other. It's Reap Purification or non-Reap Purification. I feel like Reap Purification definitely makes your clear feel a little bit better, because what Reap Purification does is it, that's not it. It instantly settles 80% of the remaining total damage when reaping. And reaping removes all that from the target. But while you're clearing, this feels really nice, because you're putting a blade that has probably more than the default duration on, and then you're settling 80% of that damage, and you're getting these big pops, right? Which is decent, but I find that when I switched to non-reap purification, the single target was, it felt better. Whereas reap purification, you have to keep hitting a lot to keep reapplying your bleed and reapplying your reaps. It's not, it's, you get a lot more uptime on your damage with non-reap purification, and the clear is just a little bit worse. So those are your two bleed playstyles. And I think in both playstyles, getting that 100 affliction is good. I don't think affliction effect is really viable to stack because of how difficult it is to get. Now, let's go into gear. So there's a lot of different gear options for bleed. As you can see, let's talk about the infinity belt. I have multiple infinity belts here that we can talk about. And there's one more complicated thing that we'll get into with the belts, which is whether you're going reap purification or not reap purification, crit can still be scaled either way. So you can go crit reap purification or go crit, go crit non-reap purification. And it really depends on what nodes you have. So here we have brutality and more of less, just scaling our dot, right? Here we have a reap belt with instant smash. So if for some reason we were going Goddess of Darkness or something, and we went down to Warlock and got Vile, you could go instant smash to get the double duration and the additional bleed damage. So that's a belt that you could go for. There's also just this belt, which has reap purification on it, and I think the most powerful part of Psychic is probably the reap that you get on the talent tree, reap purification, and the sealed mana. Those are the three things. Everything else in Psychic is kind of garbage. So having a belt with reap purification on it might allow you to play reap purification in a situation where you don't want to go Psychic, right? Where you don't need to seal mana, or you don't want to take that talent. It's just you can get this, right? And that opens up a reap purification playstyle. And here we just have an instant smash one that's like good, and it was pretty cheap, right? So if you want instant smash, you can get like a life, elemental res, blur effect. Like, it's just a good item. Okay. Now I very carefully want to go over weapons here. And I'm going to talk specifically about starter and end game. So let's start with starter. For starter bleed weapons, in melee, if you're doing melee, you want one decent axe. It can be four modded if you want. And you want this bleed shield. Right here, thorn shield, to add more fizz to your your axe, right, to your base bleed, right? So that is a very great starter option. For ranged, as I talked about in my Bleed Carino build, you are wanting this crossbow here, 1000 Days Victory, and with both builds, you want the Bleed Gloves, which I currently have for sale because I've sort of moved past that point. But the Bleed Gloves are cheap, and they are a great option for clearing. As I can say about Bleed, here's the most important thing about Bleed, is the low, I guess it has a very low floor, if that's the right way to say it, but a very high ceiling. So it's very easy to get into Bleed and get into farming this T7s with just those starter items, the axe and shield, or the cross with the gloves, or the crossbow if you're ranged. So let's talk about the ceiling. So the ceiling on Blade is very insane. And scaling single target is still an issue with me. I do T7 Guardians and I do Traveler pretty smoothly right now on this Bleed Rahan. Not using Reap Purification and doing crit to get my double damage bleeds. And just like I said before, the non-Reap Purification, it seems like the uptime is a little bit better. You still need to keep hitting the boss if you want to maximize your damage, but leaving that bleed on, actually, it feels very strong. Whereas with Reap Purification, it just, I don't know, you feel like you're missing out so much by not hitting. But we, of course, have the Rains. This is a Rain I would recommend. It's different. It's not a second Reaping cooldown recovery speed Rain, but it does have Affliction Inflicted, which is very good quality of life. Affliction Effect, which I was testing, and you always want T1 ailments. I still think one Reaping CDR Rain is really good, so you should probably get one of those. That looks kind of like this. And then we're going to talk about sort of the big thing, which is how you finish up your gear, non-weapons, and then I'll talk about the late game weapons that you want to go for. So first off, you want an Explode Chest. This isn't the best Explode Chest. It has 30% physical, T1 life, the Explode, T1 erosion, and then just whatever I wanted to put on it. But you might notice, if you're from Path of Exile like me, that this is doing fire damage. And you might say, well, Problematic Boy, your belt has brutality. You can't do elemental damage. Trust me on this. I'm not going to go into a quick map because this is more of an instructional video, but if you kill an enemy, it's not counting as your damage when it explodes. It's actually doing the fire damage. So you do want the explode there, and then you can swap your gloves from the bleed gloves that pop, because you're already getting explosion from that fire source, and you want reap on them, so you can get another reap source. And you also want to ominous them for +1 melee skill level, because that is another important bleed discovery. Is that when you're doing bleed, the level of your skill matters a ton. It matters a ton. As you can see down here, we have this 1027% weapon attack damage modifier. This is only a level 21 gem. We can get 2 skill levels on our amulet. We can get 1 skill level on our gloves. And depending on what you want to do, it's possible you could go for, active skill level on chest and still use the bleed gloves if that's what you want to do. I think it's better to go for the additional reap and get the +1 skill level. And then if you're dual wielding axes, and only if you're dual wielding axes, in your offhand, you can get +2 melee skill level. So we obviously don't have that here, but you can get up to 5 additional skill levels on that main skill, and it's going to scale your damage incredibly. So I think that's pretty much the key to single target right now, is getting your weapons sorted, your end game weapons sorted, and getting that gem level increase, which means it's going to cost a lot of ominous, a lot of crafting your gear up. It's the very high ceiling on these bleed builds. It's cheap to get started, but you got to farm for a long time to get what you want. Now let's talk about the end game weapons. There are 3 weapon types. 3 that are good for bleed. There's no others. There's one-handed axes, there's great axes, two-handed axes, and then there's crossbows. 3. Count them 3. You're not using a sword, you're not using a hammer, you're not using a bow, you're not using a gun, You're not using a pistol. You're using two one-handed axes, or if you're starting, one-handed axe and shield. But end game, you're always going to be two-handed axes, or you're using a great axe, or you're using a crossbow. Okay, those are the three things that you're using. And let's talk about the mods. First, I will start with two-handed axes because that's where we're at right now. Main hand, you want high fizz. So you want this fizz roll from the ruling ember. You want this ominous roll. And you want this from the ruling ember. And this is the most important mod to have at T1 right here. Is this mod. Adds 162% or up to 170, I think it goes, of physical damage of the main hand weapon to base bleed damage. This is the one that's most important to be at T1. Then you have the Reap. Now when it comes to Reap, if you're going Reap Purification, the Reap duration, see it says 1 second here, doesn't matter a whole lot. If you're not going to Reap Purification, it matters a lot more. So, because, it's still good to have a longer Reap duration with Reap Purification, I believe, but it matters a lot less because you're settling the remaining 80% anyway. If you're not Reap Purifying, then you're only settling what the Reap duration says, right? Plus whatever modifiers to Reap duration you have. So, that's important to note that you might want T1 here if you're not going Reap Purification. And then we have some gear attack crits, so that our crits are a bit more consistent. And this is the main hand axe when you're dual wielding. This is what you want. And then ideally the corrodes, like I said, you want to corrode this and you want to corrode this probably if you get a double corrode. Obviously we got fucking elemental damage, which is useless. Okay, move on to the offhand. The offhand's a little different, okay? This mod is still the most important mod to have at T1 because it stacks with the other mod. So you need this. Then you need base bleed damage because the physical damage of your offhand is not going to add. It's not going to add to the base bleed. So you need base bleed damage because that'll add to the base bleed. Then you want to, of course, we have a filler mod here, restore 1% life on defeat. The ominous mod for +2 melee skill level is supposed to go here, right? That's where we want that. And then you want, obviously, the Reap can go either way if you're Purification or not. Obviously, I should have it at T1 because I'm not doing Reap Purification at the moment. But, I'm a little loosey-goosey with my gear. And then we have, not T1 Affliction effect. We have T1 bleed damage, though. That's pretty important, too. Okay. Those are your one-handed dual axes. But what if you want to do a two-handed axe and you want to be a real Chad? Well, the philosophy is the same as the main hand axe. You want this hybrid mod, which is giving paralysis and flat fizz. You want, when you're crafting it, let's reel back. We're reeling back. This axe isn't finished yet, obviously. But when you're crafting your axe, you want any roll of gear physical damage, and this goes for crossbows too, on the axe. Why do you want this? So that when you ominous, if it selects this spot, it'll try to replace it with the gear physical ominous because you can't have two gear physical mods in the same item. So this increases your chance a little bit of getting the ominous that you want. So, of getting this mod here, this big gear fizz mod here. That my camera's kind of covering it, but you want to put a little one on when you're crafting. Same thing. You want high. This is the most important T1 you can get. You want this. On two-handed axes, it always rolls T1 if you hit bleed damage. So keep that in mind. And then you get a special mod. You get 21% additional damage taken by enemies. This is a technique mod. When they have maximum affliction, this is 21% more damage. It's similar to the crossbow mod that we're going to talk about. So you want to get this because this is the best damage you can get. And then obviously Reap, 1.5 seconds is the best. It's not as important if you're going Purification, but we already talked about that. Okay, let's talk about the crossbow real quick. And I'm gonna log on to the Carino so you can see. I'm gonna log right into him. Here we have Bungus the Train. We're gonna move over to Cinnamon Mint, who I've been fucking around with. But his crossbow should be somewhere. And we can look at the crossbow. Is this the crossbow? Nope. Is this the crossbow? Yes. Okay. Let's talk about this crossbow. I'm pretty sure I crafted this one wrong, but I got saved by the corrode, and I think it's actually correct. So, it's correct now. So, this is the most important mod, as usual. 233% of the fizz. You want it at T1 to base bleed. You want the ominous mod, which actually gives chance to bleed, which is pretty good if you're lacking it. With the big gear physical. And then you probably want the hybrid mod that gives the knockback. If we look at it here. Go to the affix list. Go down to Crossbow. Go to Ruling Ember. We have added gear physical. And chance to cause knockbacks. You definitely want this at T1. Get this at T1 if you're crafting yourself. Just like with all the other weapons, you want gear physical, any roll to block for your ominous on your prefix. And then for your suffixes, you want not bleeding duration. Don't even look at that. You want bleed damage T1. You want additional bleed damage dealt by projectile skills at T1. This is similar to that affliction mod I was talking about, except this one's even better because you don't need to have affliction on it. It's just 15% more damage. And then instead of bleed duration, I think you have options here. Let me be absolutely sure that the information I'm giving is correct. Let me be absolutely sure here. I think you have options. You do have options. Okay, so you can go for Reap, which I think is pretty good. You can go for the 1.5 second Reap or the 1 second Reap, depending on your preference. And then also you can get more consistent attack speed or crit. It's going to be up to you, right? It might depend on what setup you're running. And then I've shown... Let me finish off the video with a little summary. For those who have been patient and listened, thank you so much. I hope you've learned quite a bit. Is that what you want to do? First, that bleed has a lot of options is what you need to know. And that it's possible to go, depending on your talent choices, for crit or non-crit. Or for reap purification or non-purification. And either reap purification or non-reap purification can be crit or non-crit. So keep that in mind, that you really can mix and match anything, and that in general, if you're going for a non-crit setup, I would recommend leaning mostly on these Goddess of Darkness talents, maybe even going Psychic instead of using a Reap Purification belt, going Goddess of Darkness, mix and match what feels best to you. Now, that's what I did when I found out that going this route, where I have these things, even though my gear had life on it, I didn't have enough life. I had to find some way to get life. One of the downsides of going Psychic and Warlock and Goddess of Darkness is they don't have a whole lot of life. These have an okay amount of life, God of War and Shadow Dancer, but if you really want life or defense, the Brave and Blood Striker just outperform everything. So you really got to think about that. If that's what you want, then go for that, right? I had some comments, or one comment saying, please show the talents, and really I just want to give you a suite of talent options and talent choices that make sense, right? Like the 4 strong ones. God of War, Shadow Dancer, Psychic, and Warlock. Those are your strong 4 talents for damage, and you could really just try them out, you know? Try them out and see what it's doing. When I take this build that I'm currently doing with God of War, Shadow Dancer, and Blood Striker, and I swap my build around to Reap Purification, I find that the DPS is roughly the same, but the uptime is different. So the total damage is about the same, but I'm feeling better uptime and a lot more mobility that I can do on the non-Reap Purification, and that's just up to you. So hopefully this was a helpful video. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. This is the bleed instructional video. I hope that if there's any clarifying questions that you that you would like, like why Rahan, why Carino, why anything, just let me know in the comments, or you can chat at me at twitch.tv/problematicboy. I'm live almost every day, usually every day. So thank you. See you next time. Bye bye. Long video.